I'm Marcus, I'm 32 years old, and my own brother smashed my master's thesis laptop 1 week before it was due, while my parents laughed. Before I tell you how I ended up owning the very place they held their lavish family reunions, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It all started on a Saturday 7 days before the single most important deadline of my life. The air in my small apartment was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of my old, overworked laptop. For months, this machine had been my lifeline. It held my entire master's thesis in architectural engineering, 200 pages of research, complex 3D models, and a design concept for sustainable urban housing that I'd poured my soul into. My thesis advisor, Professor Harrington, had pulled me aside just a week prior. "Marcus," he'd said, his eyes gleaming with genuine excitement, "this isn't just a paper. This is award-winning work. This could change your entire career." Those words were the fuel that kept me going through 18-hour days, juggling my studies with a part-time tutoring gig and weekend shifts at a coffee shop just to make rent. I was broke, exhausted, but I was so close. The finish line was in sight. That's when the door to my apartment flew open. No knock, just the sound of a key turning and my younger brother, Tyler, striding in like he owned the place. He was 24, but he carried the entitlement of a king, dressed in designer clothes I couldn't afford to even look at, and reeking of some expensive cologne that cost more than my weekly groceries. "Hey," he said, not a question but a demand. "I need you to drive me and some friends to a party over in Northwood." I didn't even look up from my screen. My fingers were flying across the keyboard, trying to pin down a thought before it vanished. "Can't, Tyler. I'm on a deadline. It's due in a week." He scoffed, a sound full of derision. "You and your stupid school projects. Seriously? Dad's got a job waiting for me at the company. What's your little paper gonna get you?" "It's important to me," I said, my voice tight. "I can't." He muttered something under his breath and stormed out. I felt a brief flash of relief, thinking that was the end of it. It wasn't. A minute later, I heard a sickening crash from the living room. I bolted from my chair, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. And there he was, standing over my laptop. It was on the floor in pieces. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks. The keyboard was bent at an unnatural angle, and the chassis was split open. My life's work for the past year, shattered on the hardwood floor. Tyler looked at me, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. "Oops," he said. "It slipped." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the wreckage. Panicked, my hands shaking, I called my parents. They were there in 20 minutes. I expected, anger, support, anything but what I got. My mother, Diana, let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Marcus, you're always so dramatic. It's just a computer." My father, Richard, shook his head with a chuckle, looking at the broken machine with amusement. "Maybe you weren't meant for academics anyway, son. There's always a spot in maintenance at one of my properties." Tyler stood behind them, basking in their validation. They didn't even look at me. They looked at the mess, and they laughed. As they turned to leave, my mom patted my arm. "Don't be so sensitive." The door closed, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any scream. Just as the shock began to curdle into despair, there was a soft knock. It was my neighbor, Sophia, a fellow grad student. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the wreckage on my floor. She'd heard everything through the thin walls. "Your family did this?" she whispered, horrified. "Marcus, they can't get away with this. You have to report it." For a long time after they left, I just sat on the floor of my silent apartment. The smell of my mom's perfume still lingered in the air, a sickeningly sweet scent mixed with the bitter smell of burnt plastic from the laptop's fractured guts. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared at the pieces of my future scattered across the floorboards. It felt like every dismissive comment, every forgotten birthday, every time I was pushed aside for my golden boy brother had led to this exact moment. This was the physical manifestation of my place in the family. Broken, disposable, and ultimately, a joke. I crawled over to the largest piece of the laptop, the one with the shattered screen. In the dark, cracked glass, I saw a distorted reflection of my own face. It was the face of a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, defeated. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. It turned from flesh and blood into something cold and sharp, like steel. This wasn't just about a laptop anymore. This was about my entire life. My eyes drifted to a dusty bookshelf in the corner. Tucked behind a row of heavy architectural textbooks was a small, worn wooden box. I hadn't opened it in years. It belonged to my grandfather, my mom's dad. He was a carpenter, a builder, a man who worked with his hands and believed in the integrity of a solid foundation. He'd passed away when I was a teenager, but he was the only one in the family who ever seemed to see me. He taught me how to read blueprints, how to feel the grain of wood. My hands were shaking as I opened the box. Inside, on top of some old woodworking tools, was a folded piece of paper. It was a note he'd written to me for my high school graduation, in his strong, blocky handwriting. I unfolded it. It said, "Marcus, they can knock down anything you build, but they can't take away the builder. A good foundation can withstand any storm. Be the foundation." Reading those words, it was like a jolt of electricity shot through me. The ghost in the reflection was gone. I stood up. The despair was still there, a heavy cloak on my shoulders, but now there was something else underneath it. Resolve. Cold, hard, and absolute. The next morning, I was a man on a mission. The grief was gone, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I had to do. First, I needed money. I walked into a downtown pawn shop with my prized acoustic guitar, the one I'd saved up for 2 years to buy. The shop owner offered me a fraction of what it was worth. I didn't haggle. I just took the cash. Next went my collection of rare architectural books, each one a treasure I'd hunted down in used bookstores. It felt like selling pieces of myself, but it was necessary. With a few $100s in my pocket, I went straight to the university. My first stop was Professor Harrington's office. I walked in, holding the dead, broken laptop in a box like it was a body for burial. I didn't have to say much. The sight of it, combined with the look on my face, told him everything. His face, usually so kind and professorial, darkened with a rage that startled me. "Your family did this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Richard and Diana allowed this?" He knew my father through the Alumni Association, a fact that always made me vaguely uncomfortable. "They thought it was funny," I said, my voice flat. He slammed his hand on his desk, making a stack of papers jump. "No, absolutely not. This work is too important." He immediately got on the phone, his voice sharp and authoritative. He arranged for me to have 24/7 access to the department's high-performance computer lab, and personally secured me a 2-week extension from the dean's office. "You rebuild it, Marcus," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "You build it better. I'll handle the administration." For the next 2 weeks, the computer lab became my home. I slept on the worn-out office couch, lived on vending machine coffee, and worked until the letters on the screen blurred together. It was brutal. I was rewriting entire sections from memory, painstakingly recreating complex 3D models from scratch. But I wasn't entirely alone. My friend, James, who worked in the campus IT department, took the destroyed hard drive. He was a wizard with data recovery. He spent hours in his cluttered lab, surrounded by the guts of a dozen other computers. "No promises, man," he told me, his face grim. "This thing is toast." Every few hours, Sophia would appear with a container of hot food and a fresh cup of coffee. She wouldn't say much, just sit with me while I ate, a silent, supportive presence in the sterile lab. One night, she told me about her own family, how her parents had immigrated with nothing and built a life through sheer grit. "Family isn't always who you're born to, Marcus," she said softly. "Sometimes, it's the people who show up for you when you're in the rubble." And she was right. My real family was right here, in the quiet hum of the servers and the smell of microwaved noodles. A few days into my marathon work session, James called me. Get down here. Now. I rushed to the IT lab, my heart pounding. James was staring at his monitor, his expression a mix of shock and disgust. Okay, good news and bad news, he said, not looking at me. Good news. I managed to recover about 60% of your core research files and some of the model fragments. It's a start. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. James, thank you. That's incredible. Don't thank me yet, he said, and turned the monitor towards me. On the screen was a file directory I didn't recognize. It was a folder of temporary internet files, things that are usually automatically deleted, but the crash had preserved them. Inside were fragments of emails, web history, and a PDF document. It was a loan application, a student line of credit for $3,000. My blood ran cold. The application was filled out with my name, my address, my social security number. But I had never applied for this loan. Look at the date, James said, pointing. It was dated 6 months ago. The email address used for correspondence wasn't mine. It was a burner account. But the login history for that account showed it was accessed repeatedly from an IP address that James traced back to my parents' house. There's more, he said, clicking on another file. It was a bank statement for the line of credit. The money had been withdrawn in a series of cash advances and online payments. Payments to an online gambling site. Payment for a luxury watch. A final payment of $500 to a service called SA Pro. It all clicked into place. The expensive clothes. The arrogance. The constant need for cash. Tyler hadn't just destroyed my laptop. He had stolen my identity. He had used my name, my good credit, my future, to fund his lifestyle and cheat his way through college. James looked at me, his face pale. Marcus, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This isn't just a smashed computer. This is a crime. And in that moment, I knew this fight was no longer just about a thesis. It was about taking back my name. Holding the printouts from James felt like holding a live grenade. The flimsy paper was heavy with the weight of my brother's betrayal and my parents' complicity. The cold resolve I'd felt before now had a sharp, cutting edge. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about evidence. The first thing I did was run my own credit report. There it was, in black and white. A $3,000 line of credit I never knew existed, already delinquent. My pristine credit score, the one I had carefully built since I was 18, was in tatters. He hadn't just taken money. He'd poisoned my financial future. My next step was to dig into the SA Pro payment. Took me a few hours of cross-referencing, but I found it. Tyler's senior thesis, the one my parents had praised so lavishly at a family dinner, was available online through a public university archive. I downloaded it. Then, using the transaction ID from the bank statement, I managed to contact the online writing service's customer support, posing as Tyler, claiming I'd lost the original file. They sent it to me. It was a perfect match. Word for word. He hadn't just cheated, he had bought his degree. Armed with a folder thick with evidence, I scheduled a meeting with Dean Wallace, the head of the college. I walked into his large, wood-paneled office feeling a strange sense of calm. The dean was a man who exuded authority, with a polished demeanor and an expensive suit. He looked at me over his glasses with an air of polite impatience. He knew my father. They were in the same golf club. Mr. Evans, he began, his tone smooth and dismissive. Professor Harrington informed me of your unfortunate computer incident. A tragedy. But these allegations you've made in your email are of a very serious nature. They are, I said, my voice steady. I opened my folder on his polished mahogany desk. And they are all true. I laid it all out piece by piece. The fraudulent loan application with my social security number. The bank statements showing the gambling debts and the payment to the SA Mill. The two versions of Tyler's thesis, the one he submitted and the one I obtained from the service side by side. The dean's expression shifted from polite dismissal to visible discomfort. He picked up the papers, his brow furrowed. He was no longer looking at the son of a fellow club member. He was looking at a major liability for his university. These are disturbing, he admitted, avoiding my eyes. But this seems like a personal family matter, Marcus. Are you sure you want to proceed down this path? The identity theft is a police matter, I said, my voice as cold as ice. The academic fraud is your matter, Dean. It undermines the integrity of every degree this university issues, including mine. He leaned back in his chair, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He was cornered, and he knew it. I will pass this to the Academic Integrity Committee, he said stiffly. They will conduct a full investigation. I left his office knowing I had lit a fuse. I didn't have to wait long for the explosion. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Tyler. I hadn't heard his voice since the day he'd destroyed my life's work. He wasn't smirking now. He was screaming. What the hell did you do? The voice was shrill, panicked. The dean's office just called me. They're investigating my thesis. They're putting a hold on my diploma. You're trying to ruin my life. I let him scream. I listened to the panic, the entitlement, the sheer disbelief that his actions could ever have consequences. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my voice low and calm. You already ruined your life, Tyler, I said. You just thought I would be the one to pay for it. Not this time. I hung up. An hour later, my mother called. She was crying. Not for me or what I had been through. She was crying for Tyler. Marcus, how could you? She sobbed. He's your brother. He's fragile. The pressure on him is immense. You have no idea what it's like. Fragile. I almost laughed. He stole my identity, Mom. He committed fraud. This has nothing to do with pressure. It's just money, Marcus. Money we can pay back. You are tearing this family apart over a stupid piece of paper and some money. I am family, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Or was I? When you were laughing in my apartment, did I feel like family then? Silence. Then my father got on the line. His voice was not emotional. It was cold, hard, and full of menace. Listen to me, and listen good, he snarled. You will drop this. You will call the dean tomorrow and tell him you made a mistake, that you were emotional and confused. You will end this witch hunt now. If you don't, you can forget about ever being part of this family again. You're on your own. Do you understand me? The threat hung in the air, the one they had held over my head my entire life. The threat of being cast out, of being nothing. But for the first time, it had no power. What was he threatening to take away? A family that laughed at my pain? A brother who stole from me? I understand perfectly, I said. I've been on my own for years. You just never noticed. I ended the call. The finality of it was terrifying, but it was also liberating. The chains were broken. I was standing on my own with nothing but the truth on my side. I looked at the flyer I'd picked up from the student union. University Legal Clinic. Free legal advice for students. I knew what my next step had to be. I wasn't just going to let the university handle it. Tyler didn't just break a school rule. He broke the law, and I was going to make sure he was held accountable for it. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the legal clinic. Hello? I said, my voice clearer than it had been in years. My name is Marcus Evans. I need to report a crime. Walking into the university legal clinic felt like stepping into a different world. It was a cramped, cluttered office in the basement of the law school, filled with overflowing bookshelves and the earnest energy of students who actually wanted to make a difference. That's where I met Vanessa Wright. She was a third-year law student, sharp, focused, and she didn't waste time. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. She examined the evidence I'd brought, the credit report, the bank statements, the printouts from the essay mill, with a meticulous attention to detail that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. Okay, she said, her voice crisp. Let's break this down. We have two separate issues. One is the academic fraud, which the university is handling. Good. Let them. Our focus is the criminal and civil liability. Criminal. I asked, the word still feeling foreign. Identity theft is a felony, Marcus, she said plainly. The fraudulent line of credit is wire fraud. We need to file a police report. Immediately. This creates an official record and puts pressure on the district attorney's office to take it seriously. She explained the process, cutting through the legal jargon and laying it out in simple terms. We would file the police report. We would file a formal dispute with the credit bureau. And, most importantly, we would file a civil lawsuit against Tyler. What are we suing for? I asked. Everything, she said, a flicker of a smile on her face. Restitution for the fraudulent loan, of course. Damages for the destruction of your property, the laptop. Lost wages for the time you had to take off work to redo your thesis. And punitive damages for the emotional distress. We're not just going to ask for the money back. We are going to make a statement. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa was my rock. We spent hours in that basement office preparing the case. She taught me how to document everything, how to communicate only through official channels, how to build an unshakable fortress of facts. For the first time, I felt like I had an advocate, someone who saw the situation not as messy family drama, but as a clear-cut case of right and wrong. While we prepared for war, I was also trying to build a future. My thesis was done, submitted, and I'd even presented it at a departmental symposium. Professor Harrington was ecstatic. He started making calls on my behalf, connecting me with architectural firms in other cities. You need a fresh start, Marcus, he told me. Away from all this. He was right. I started looking at job postings online, my heart sinking a little every time I saw a great opportunity in a city thousands of miles away. It felt daunting but also necessary. One evening, while working on my case files with Vanessa, I took a break to continue my research. Even though my thesis was submitted, my passion for the subject hadn't waned. My topic was adaptive reuse of heritage estates, the art of taking old, historic properties and transforming them into modern, sustainable, and functional spaces. It was a metaphor for my own life, I suppose, taking something that was broken and giving it a new purpose. I was scrolling through a digital archive of historic properties in my state when I came across a familiar name, Lakeside Manor. It was a gorgeous, sprawling Gilded Age estate about an hour from my city, a place of local legend. It was also the place where my family held their annual, ostentatious summer reunion every single year. It was a symbol of their wealth, their legacy, their perfect, curated world. I started using it as a theoretical case study for my research portfolio, downloading its original blueprints, studying its history, and sketching out ideas for how it could be renovated, how its beautiful but decaying structure could be saved and repurposed. It was just an academic exercise, a way to keep my mind sharp and focused on the future. I was building a new life on paper, brick by brick, while Vanessa was helping me dismantle the old one. I remember showing one of my sketches to Vanessa. It was a concept for turning the main hall of Lakeside Manor into a public educational center. She whistled. Wow, Marcus, you're really good. Who owns this place? My family rents it out every summer, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. It's their whole world. She looked from the sketch to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. You know, she said slowly, the best revenge isn't just winning. It's building something better on the ashes of what they tried to burn down. At the time, I just thought it was a nice sentiment. I had no idea how prophetic her words would turn out to be. I was so focused on the upcoming battle that I couldn't see the war had already shifted in my favor. The foundation was laid. All I had to do was wait for the storm to break. The day of the university's academic integrity hearing arrived on a gray, overcast morning that perfectly matched my mood. This wasn't a courtroom, not yet. It was a sterile, intimidating conference room on the top floor of the administration building. At a long, imposing table sat the disciplinary committee. Dean Wallace, 2 tenured professors I'd never seen before, and the university's general counsel. Vanessa sat beside me, a calm, solid presence. On the other side of the room sat my family. My father, Richard, was in a perfectly tailored suit, looking more annoyed than concerned. as if this was just an inconvenient business meeting he was forced to attend. My mother, Diana, was dressed in white, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the part of the heartbroken matriarch. And between them was Tyler. He wasn't smirking anymore. He looked pale, sullen, and he refused to meet my eyes. The hearing began. Dean Wallace laid out the allegations in a dry, formal tone. Academic dishonesty in the form of plagiarism and conduct unbecoming a student in relation to the destruction of my property. My father spoke first, his voice smooth and commanding, the voice he used to charm investors and intimidate contractors. With all due respect, Dean, he started. This is a profound misunderstanding, a family squabble that has gotten out of hand. Marcus has always been emotional, highly sensitive. He's been under a great deal of stress with his thesis, and frankly, we're very concerned about his state of mind. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling artfully. He and Tyler had a small argument. A laptop was accidentally knocked over. It was an accident, and now, in his distress, he's making up these wild, hurtful stories to lash out. We love both our sons equally. This is tearing our family apart. They were good. They were very, very good. They painted a picture of me as an unstable, vindictive son, and of Tyler as the innocent victim of my emotional breakdown. I could see one of the professors on the committee nodding with a sympathetic frown. My heart sank. Vanessa leaned over and whispered, "Let them talk. They're hanging themselves." Then it was Tyler's turn. He mumbled his way through a prepared statement, talking about the immense pressure to live up to the family name, how he'd made a mistake in judgment by not citing some sources correctly, how the pressure had made him clumsy. He ended by looking at me, his eyes full of what he probably thought looked like remorse. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a masterful performance." I felt a surge of white-hot rage. Then, Dean Wallace cleared his throat. "The committee has one final person to speak with, Mr. Ethan Morris." My father's head snapped up. Ethan was Tyler's best friend, his right-hand man. He was on the witness list as a character witness for Tyler. Richard relaxed, a small, confident smile touching his lips. This was their ace in the hole. Ethan walked in, looking nervous. He was a lanky kid who always seemed to be living in Tyler's shadow. He sat down at the table, fidgeting with his hands. The dean started the questioning. "Mr. Morris, you are here as a character witness for Mr. Evans. Can you tell us about your friendship?" Ethan mumbled a few platitudes about how Tyler was a great guy, fun to be around. Then Vanessa, as my representative, was allowed to ask a few questions. She had done her homework. "Mr. Morris," she began, her voice gentle. "You're also a student here, correct? In the business school." "Yes," Ethan whispered. "And you took Professor Albright's Marketing Fundamentals class last semester, didn't you? Along with Tyler." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "Yes. That class had a major group project, worth 40% of the final grade. My records show you and Tyler were partners, and that your group was flagged for sourcing irregularities, but was ultimately cleared after a review. Is that correct?" Ethan swallowed hard. He looked over at Tyler, who was now staring at him with a look of pure panic. My father's confident smile had vanished. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice cracking. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "The committee is, of course, taking all instances of academic dishonesty very seriously right now. A full audit of recent cases is underway. I'm sure a student with a previously clean record who chose to be fully transparent and cooperative would be looked upon favorably. It was a brilliant move. She wasn't threatening him. She was offering him a lifeboat, and he took it." The dean, sensing the shift, interjected. "Mr. Morris, let's go back to the night Mr. Evans' laptop was destroyed. Where were you?" Ethan took a deep breath. He wouldn't look at Tyler. He looked at the table. "I was at a party with Tyler earlier that evening." "And did Tyler say anything about his brother?" the dean pressed. There was a long, agonizing silence. Then Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second. And he broke. He was angry, Ethan said, his voice suddenly clear and steady. Marcus wouldn't give him a ride. He was ranting about it. He said his brother was getting too big for his britches with his fancy degree. He said Marcus needed to be, quote, taught his place. A gasp came from my mother. My father's face was ashen. The dean leaned forward. Did he say how he was going to teach him his place? Ethan nodded, misery etched on his face. He said he was going to go over there and smash that stupid laptop his brother loved more than his own family. He was bragging about it. He thought it was funny. It was over. The room was silent, except for the sound of my mother's quiet, horrified sob. This time it wasn't for the cameras. It was real. Dean Wallace looked at my father, his expression now one of utter contempt. The committee has heard enough, he announced, his voice booming in the small room. A decision will be rendered within 24 hours. He didn't need 24 hours. We got the email that evening. Tyler was expelled from the university. The committee's findings would be formally entered into his permanent record. They also issued a binding recommendation for full financial restitution for all damages, to be settled either privately or through a civil court action. They had walked into that room as the powerful Evans family, ready to discredit their black sheep son. They walked out with their golden child disgraced and their perfect world in flames. The first domino had fallen, and I was the one who had pushed it. The victory at the hearing wasn't a moment of explosive joy. It was a quiet, grim satisfaction. The truth was out, but the war wasn't over. The university's decision was a massive blow to my family's pride. But I knew my father wouldn't take it lying down. The civil lawsuit, filed by Vanessa the day after the hearing, was the next step. Armed with the university's official findings, our case was ironclad. My father, realizing he was cornered, hired a high-powered lawyer who immediately tried to settle out of court. The offer was insulting. They'd pay for the cost of the laptop and nothing more, on the condition that I sign a non-disclosure agreement. Vanessa laughed out loud when she read the email. He still thinks he's in control, she said, shaking her head. We countered with our original demand. Full restitution for the laptop, the fraudulent loan, lost wages, and punitive damages. No NDA. This is when I saw the first real cracks in my father's untouchable facade. He tried to do what he always did, use his money and influence to make the problem go away. I found out later from a friend who worked in the university's development office that my father called the university president directly, a man he'd golfed with for a decade. He hinted at pulling a major donation he had pledged for a new library wing if this unfortunate situation wasn't handled more discreetly. The president, who now had the full, ugly report from the disciplinary committee on his desk, politely but firmly told my father that the university's integrity was not for sale. The call ended, I was told, with a stony silence. For the first time in his life, my father's checkbook couldn't buy him a solution. He had been publicly rebuffed, and in his world that was a fatal wound. The effects started trickling down. My mother, who lived for her social standing, found herself in a suddenly chilly environment. She was a board member for a prominent local children's charity. At their next meeting, another board member, a woman whose son was also at the university, asked her some pointed, concerned questions about the rumors she'd been hearing. The polite smiles couldn't hide the judgment in their eyes. My mother came home from that meeting, I later learned from a family acquaintance, and didn't leave her room for 2 days. Their perfect image, the one they had curated so carefully for decades, was starting to tarnish. They fought the lawsuit for a few more weeks, but their lawyer finally advised them that going to court would be a disaster. The story would become public record. They settled. A check for $80,000 arrived at Vanessa's office. Felt less like money and more like a surrender. After the check cleared, I made the final move. I changed my phone number. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked them on every social media platform. Then I wrote them one last letter. It was short and to the point. This was never about the money. It was about the truth. You had a choice between your two sons, and you chose the one who lied. I am now making my own choice. I am choosing myself. I will be moving to Chicago to accept a position with an architectural firm. Do not try to contact me. Goodbye. The last call came from an unknown number a few days before I was scheduled to leave. I almost didn't answer, but I did. It was my mother. "Marcus, please," she begged, her voice raw. "Don't do this. You're tearing this family apart." I stood in my now empty apartment, surrounded by boxes. The place was clean, sterile, holding no memory of the pain that had happened there. I held the phone to my ear and said the words I knew would end it for good. "You're wrong, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of anger, full of a strange, sad peace. "You, Dad, and Tyler are a family. You proved that. The problem was I was never really a part of it. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just walking away from the rubble." I hung up before she could reply. I packed the last box, which contained the broken pieces of my old laptop. I didn't know why I was keeping them, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. They were a reminder. As I drove out of town, heading east towards Chicago and my new life, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me to see. 18 months. That's how long it took for my world to completely transform. Chicago was a baptism by fire. The firm I joined, Urban Innovation, was at the cutting edge of architectural design. The work was demanding, the hours were long, but for the first time in my life I felt seen. My ideas were valued. My work was respected. I wasn't Richard Evans's disappointing son. I was Marcus Evans, a damn good architect. My master's thesis, the one I had rebuilt from ashes, ended up winning a national award for student design. The recognition was validating, but the real prize was the confidence it gave me. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was dating Sophia, who had moved to Chicago a few months after I did to take a job in sustainable engineering. We were building a life together, a life based on mutual respect and support, a foundation that felt unshakable. Then, about a year into my new life, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Olivia Reeves, an investigative journalist. She said she was working on a story about academic fraud at my former university and had come across my case. She wanted to hear my side of the story. I was hesitant at first. I had moved on. But Sophia convinced me. "Your story isn't just about you, Marcus," she said. "It could help someone else who feels voiceless." So I talked to her. I told her everything. The article she published a month later was a bombshell. It was titled, "Family Loyalty or Family Scapegoat: How One Student's Fight for Justice Uncovered a Culture of Corruption." It went viral. Olivia had done her homework. She had found 2 other students with similar stories of being silenced by wealthy, influential families. My story was the centerpiece, the one that tied it all together. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my family. The story wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was a national headline. My father's business, which was built on a reputation of integrity, took a massive hit. Investors got nervous. Contracts were reevaluated. The story painted him as a bully who enabled a cheat, and in the world of high-stakes real estate, character was currency. He was suddenly bankrupt of it. My mother was quietly asked to step down from 2 of her charity boards. Their social world, the one they valued above all else, had slammed its doors in their faces. I felt a distant, detached sense of justice, but my focus was on my own work. My specialty at Urban Innovation was exactly what my thesis had been about: the adaptive reuse of heritage properties. One day, my boss called me into his office. "Marcus," he said, spreading a set of blueprints across his desk, "a unique opportunity has come up. A historic property, Lakeside Manor, is on the market. The owning family is in financial decline, and they're being forced to sell. It's a gem, but it needs a lot of work. Your award-winning thesis practically used it as a case study. I want you to lead the acquisition and redevelopment project." My heart stopped. Lakeside Manor, the symbol of everything my family stood for. Now it was a symbol of their failure, and it was being handed to me. "I'm on it," I said, my voice betraying none of the seismic shock I was feeling. We bought the property. For months, I oversaw the project, driving out from Chicago twice a week. We weren't tearing it down. We were restoring it, healing it, giving it a new purpose as a state-of-the-art educational retreat and innovation center. We were building on the old foundation, making it stronger. The day of the final confrontation came on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was on site, wearing a tailored suit and a hard hat, directing a team of contractors on the main lawn when a familiar, expensive-looking sedan pulled up the long, winding driveway. My parents got out. They looked smaller, older. My father's confident stride was gone, replaced by a weary shuffle. My mother's face was etched with lines of stress that her expensive makeup couldn't hide. They didn't see me at first. They were looking at the main house, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger at the construction. They approached one of my foremen, my father already starting in with an indignant tone. "Excuse me, who's in charge here? We've been trying to book this venue for our annual family gathering." And that's when I turned to face them. "I'm in charge," I said. The blood drained from my mother's face. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father just stared, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a full 10 seconds, nobody spoke. "Marcus?" My mother finally whispered. You work here?" "In a manner of speaking," I said, my voice calm and even. "My company owns the place now. I'm heading the project to turn it into an educational center." My father found his voice, a choked, sputtering sound. You bought it? How?" "It turns out that when you're not spending your energy dealing with family drama, you can get a lot of work done," I said. "Success has a way of following." They started to stammer. Apologies, explanations, excuses. My mother claimed they were just trying to protect Tyler because he was always so fragile. My father, falling back on his only tool, tried to talk about money, about making amends. I held up a hand, stopping them. I looked past them, down the long driveway towards the main road. "I hear the public park 2 towns over has some very nice picnic areas," I told them, my voice polite but final. "You'll find it's much more in your budget now. This property is no longer available for your gatherings." I turned my back on them and walked towards the main house, leaving them standing on the lawn of the life they had lost. As I reached the steps, Sophia came out to meet me, slipping her hand into mine. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I watched their car turn around and disappear down the driveway. I took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air. "For the first time in my life," I said, looking at the beautiful old building that was now my responsibility, my project, my future, "I actually am." The grand hall of Lakeside Manor was unrecognizable. The dusty, decaying ballroom where my family had once held their self-congratulatory parties was now a bright, modern amphitheater. Sunlight streamed through restored floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the faces of 100 eager scholarship students. On the wall behind the stage, where a stuffy portrait of some long-dead industrialist used to hang, there was now a single stark piece of art. It was a fragment of a shattered laptop screen, mounted on a simple black background. Underneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Sometimes you have to rebuild from scratch." I stood at the podium looking out at the students. Sophia was in the front row, smiling up at me. I was delivering the keynote address for the center's inaugural Youth Leadership Conference. My topic was resilience in design and in life. I talked about strong foundations, about how a structure's greatest weaknesses could be transformed into its most interesting features. "Destruction," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large hall, "is never the end of the story. Often, it's a violent, unwanted clearing of the ground. It removes what was weak, what was unstable, and it forces you to find what is essential. It creates the space for something new, something stronger, to emerge." The morning of the academic integrity hearing was gray and suffocating. The air was heavy with unspoken tension as we rode the elevator up to the top floor of the administration building. The conference room they had chosen was clearly designed to intimidate. It was dominated by a massive, polished oak table that reflected the grim, overcast sky like a dark mirror. At the head of the table sat the disciplinary committee. Dean Wallace, looking stern and impartial, two senior professors whose faces were unreadable masks, and the university's sharp-eyed general counsel. Vanessa sat to my right, her files arranged in a neat, precise stack. She was a picture of calm professionalism. Across the table sat my family. My father, Richard, was in his element, dressed in a power suit, exuding an aura of controlled indignation. He looked at the committee as if they were a slightly incompetent board of directors he was about to set straight. My mother, Diana, was the image of suffering grace, dressed in a pale cream suit, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, and between them, looking small and sullen, was Tyler. He stared at the table, refusing to look at anyone. Dean Wallace began the proceedings, his voice a dry monotone as he read the official charges. A violation of the university's honor code through severe plagiarism, and conduct detrimental to another student through the destruction of academic property. My father insisted on speaking first. His voice was a rich, reasonable baritone, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. Dean Wallace, members of the committee, he began, a sad, knowing smile on his face. I think we can all agree that this is a tragedy, a family matter that has, regrettably, spilled into this formal setting. My son Marcus, he said, turning a look of deep paternal concern on me, has always been a brilliant but intense young man. The pressure of his graduate work has been immense, and we, as his family, have been deeply worried about his emotional state. This entire incident stems from a simple accident, a misunderstanding that has been blown far out of proportion by his stress. My mother picked up the thread seamlessly, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. He and Tyler had a silly argument. Brothers do that. A laptop was knocked from a table. It was a clumsy, unfortunate accident. And now Marcus, in his pain and confusion, is lashing out. He's creating these wild, hurtful fantasies to make sense of his own stress. We love both our sons more than anything. This is simply breaking my heart. It was a masterful performance. They were painting me as unhinged, as a mentally unstable fabricator, and themselves as the concerned, loving parents caught in the middle. I could see one of the professors, a woman with kind eyes, looking at me with pity. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. This was their strategy, to discredit the witness. Vanessa leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice a thread of steel. Breathe. Let them build their own gallows. Then it was Tyler's turn. He read from a prepared statement, his voice a low mumble. He spoke of the crushing pressure of the family name, of making a terrible mistake in judgment by inadequately citing some of his sources. He described the laptop incident as a freak accident that he regretted more than anything. He finished by turning to me, his eyes glassy with crocodile tears. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never, ever meant for any of this to happen. The air in the room was thick with their lies. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, so intense it made my vision swim. I wanted to scream, to call them out, but I felt Vanessa's hand gently touch my arm, a silent command to stay calm. Then, Dean Wallace cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. The committee has one final individual to speak with. We call Mr. Ethan Morris. A flicker of surprise, then confidence, crossed my father's face. Ethan, Tyler's best friend, his loyal lapdog. He was on the witness list as a character witness for Tyler. This was the final nail in my coffin. Ethan walked in, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. He was a lanky kid who always seemed to be trying to fold in on himself. He sat down at the witness chair, pointedly avoiding looking at the Evans family. The dean began with simple questions. Mr. Morris, you are a friend of Tyler Evans, correct? Yes, sir. Best friends. Ethan mumbled. You're here to speak to his character? Yes, he's a good guy. My father leaned back in his chair, a smug, satisfied look on his face. The show was almost over. Then Vanessa, as my official representative, was granted permission to ask a few questions. She rose slowly. "Mr. Morris?" she began, her voice soft and non-threatening. "You're a business student here, aren't you?" "Yes," Ethan whispered. "And you were enrolled in Professor Albright's Marketing Fundamentals class last semester?" Ethan's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Yes. You were partners with Tyler Evans on the final group project for that class, correct? The project worth 40% of your final grade." Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He shot a quick, panicked look at Tyler, who was now staring at him, his expression turning from sullen to terrified. "That's right," Ethan said, his voice cracking. Vanessa's voice remained gentle, but her words were like a surgeon's scalpel. "My records indicate that your project was initially flagged by the plagiarism detection software for sourcing irregularities. It was ultimately cleared after a review, but a formal warning was placed in both of your student files. Is that accurate, Mr. Morris?" The trap was sprung. My father sat bolt upright, his confident smirk gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Ethan looked like a cornered animal. He knew that lying to the committee was grounds for immediate expulsion. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "The dean's office, as you can imagine, is taking all instances of academic dishonesty extremely seriously at this time. A full audit of all recent cases, including yours, is already underway. I am certain that a student with a previously minor infraction who chose to be fully transparent and cooperative in a major investigation would find the committee very understanding. She wasn't threatening him. She was offering him a lifeboat, a way to save himself from going down with Tyler's sinking ship. He took it." The dean, sensing the momentum shift, leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Morris, let's return to the evening of Saturday, October 12th. The night Mr. Evans's laptop was destroyed. Can you tell the committee where you were?" Ethan took a shaky breath. He stared at the polished surface of the table as if it held the answers to the universe. Then he looked up. He didn't look at Tyler. He didn't look at my parents. He looked directly at me. "I was at a party," he said, his voice suddenly clear and strong. "With Tyler. Before he went to Marcus's apartment." "And did Tyler mention his brother at this party?" the dean pressed. There was a long, charged silence. Then Ethan's face crumpled slightly, a look of profound misery mixed with resolve. "Yes, he was angry. Marcus wouldn't give him a ride. He was ranting about it. He said Marcus was getting too big for his britches with his fancy pants thesis. He said his brother needed to be taught a lesson. He needed to be put back in his place." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. My father looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The dean leaned closer to the microphone, his voice sharp. "Did he elaborate on what kind of lesson he had in mind, Mr. Morris?" Ethan nodded, his eyes closing for a brief moment. "Yes, he said he was going to go over there and smash that stupid laptop his brother loved more than his own family. He said it would be hilarious. He was bragging about it to a group of us. He thought it was funny." The carefully constructed world of the Evans family imploded in that silent, sterile conference room. The truth, raw and ugly, was finally out. My mother's sobs were no longer artful. They were the ragged, choking sounds of genuine horror. Dean Wallace looked at my father, his face a mask of cold, professional contempt. "This committee has heard enough," he announced, his voice echoing with the weight of judgment. "A decision will be rendered and delivered via email within 24 hours. He didn't need that long. The email arrived in our inboxes at 7 p.m. that evening. Tyler Evans was permanently expelled from the university. The committee's findings of severe academic and personal misconduct would be entered into his permanent, non-expungible record. They also issued a binding recommendation for full financial restitution for all damages incurred by me, a recommendation that would carry significant weight in a civil court. They had walked into that room as untouchable titans, ready to sweep me away like a fly. They walked out in disgrace, Their golden child branded a cheat and a bully. Their perfect family portrait shattered beyond repair. The first, most important battle had been won. As the students applauded, my eyes scanned the room. And that's when I saw him. Standing at the very back of the hall near the exit was Tyler. He was alone. He wasn't the preening, confident golden boy I remembered. He was thinner, dressed in simple, unremarkable clothes. He looked humbled. His eyes weren't filled with anger or resentment. They just looked tired. Our eyes met for a brief, fleeting moment across the crowded room. There was no animosity in his gaze, just a quiet, somber acknowledgement. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and slipped out the door before anyone noticed him. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something quieter. It was an ending. It was two brothers, now two strangers, who had finally found their own separate paths that would never cross again. I turned back to the students, a genuine smile on my face. I answered their questions, shared my experiences, and felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. It was the simple, profound joy of building something. Later that evening, Sophia and I walked the grounds, the sun setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. We stood on the great lawn where my parents had stood, but instead of the ghosts of the past, I just saw the promise of the future. The pain was a scar, not a wound. It was a part of my foundation now, a reminder of the storm I had weathered. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my foundation was strong enough to build anything on. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it has touched you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to completely rebuild? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like or follow so you don't miss what's next.